Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. I want to talk about operating a mixture of rental properties. I've got direct experience in this for a long period of time. What I'm going to discuss is I'm going to compare owning single family units, which includes standalone single family homes and townhomes, and then also apartment buildings. Which is better? That's kind of the discussion here. Let's start off with the difference in managing these two kinds of properties. Single family homes, and again, this is from direct experience, have a lower turnover than apartment buildings. We've got some tenants in some of our standalone single family home units who have been there over 10 years. And it's not super uncommon that tenants in a more home-like environment, with a yard, something that feels more like a home compared to just a box inside a large building, an apartment building. For some reason, single family home tenants stay longer. That's not going to be true consistently with every tenant, but just in general, overall, I've noticed that it's easier to have a tenant move in and they end up staying longer, including if you do rent increases. We've done some pretty gnarly rent increases to single family home tenants and they still do not move out. Whereas with apartment building tenants, a little bit different story. With an apartment building, one difference in terms of managing these two different types, if one tenant moves out of an apartment building, the majority of the tenants are still there, so you're still collecting rent to pay the mortgage. Not so with a single family home. When one tenant moves out, the whole thing's empty. Another issue about managing, the difference between managing a single apartment building with lots of units versus a home or a collection of homes like we have. If you have different locations, logistically that can be an issue because you have to be able to get access to the properties. It's not as straightforward predicting the traffic, the commute time. The neighborhoods can evolve differently if they're not all in one location. If you own an apartment building, which we do, having one location, it's much easier to take care of things. For example, if you have several issues you have to take care of, you make one commute to the apartment building and you're on the scene and you can take care of everything. Versus different issues going on at different single family units, you'll end up having to drive to different locations. So apartment buildings are easier in that regard, but there are some other reasons for favoring single-family standalone units like single-family homes or townhomes that I'll get to here. So the ease of buying. Generally, apartment buildings, they're more expensive, obviously, and the loans are usually higher interest, and they're only a 10-year duration. They're amortized over 30 years. In other words, the loan payments you make are as if you had a 30-year loan, but the loan becomes due and payable in 10 years instead of 30. So that's different from buying 1 to 4 units, a single-family home, a duplex, a triplex, a fourplex, or townhome. You can get lower interest rate 30-year loans on those properties. Lower interest rate loans. The other issue is there are fewer apartment building lenders. Generally, with an apartment building, you're going to be getting a debt service coverage ratio loan, a DSCR loan, or you're going to be getting a bank statement loan type versus the single family standalone unit, 1 to 4 units, more accurately. Almost everyone writes, almost any lender you would find will have a loan program for this type of property for 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units, 4 units. But for single family homes and townhomes, you have a lot of options for lenders. Not so with apartment buildings. There are fewer of them. These are commercial residential loans. They're called commercial properties because they're more than 5 units. These are residential loans. Okay, so ease of operations. So with a single family standalone unit, a townhome or a single family home, there are no common areas that you have to take care of. The landlord has no common area responsibility that's borne by the tenant. The tenant's responsible for the whole property. Also, with a single family home or a townhome, the renter pays all the utilities generally. Water, garbage, electric, and if there's a gas utility and internet, they pay for all that. In an apartment building, generally you're going to be expected to provide internet for the whole building. You'll usually negotiate some sort of contract with the local internet provider to cover your whole building, and then you can charge a little bit to each tenant. You can divide up the total cost among all the units. But the apartment building owner also, generally, you're going to be paying the water and the garbage bills. And the cool thing about a standalone unit is you have none of that, especially with the internet. If you don't know anything about maintaining a router this can be a real problem. If you have tenants in an apartment building, which we've run into, who use torrents, Torrents, if you have even just one tenant who uses a torrent network, they can bring down the entire router for the whole building. There are ways to fix that. If you have any questions, ask in the comments. That's kind of a rarely known skill to be able to solve that problem. I'd be happy to point you in the right direction. If you own an apartment building and you're having a lot of complaints about slow internet access, just leave me a comment, post a comment, and I'll point you in the right direction to solve that problem. It's actually pretty straightforward to solve this problem in most cases. Okay, so we're still on ease of operating these different types of units, apartment buildings or single-family units. If you have a pot or cigarette smoker going against a lease, assuming you have no smoking clause in the lease, pretty easy to find and evict someone from a single standalone dwelling unit if they're violating that part of the lease. In an apartment building, and by the way, I've run into both of these issues in both cases, it is harder to find and evict a smoker, someone violating the no smoking rule, pot or cigarettes, in an apartment building because the smoke travels. There are drafts in the building. It can go up through the between floors in the building. It's harder to find and evict if you own an apartment building. And are there people out there who do not give a flying F about the no smoking rules? Yes, there are. And the one thing I've noticed is if you have a pot smoker, they tend to be much more defiant about that rule than cigarette smokers. I have no idea why, but it's just a fact that for some reason pot smokers have it in their mind that it's different somehow from cigarette smoking. It's not, because here's the problem that it causes. If you have a no smoking requirement in your lease, then when people move in and you tell them there's no smoking, everybody knows it's no smoking. Everybody expects they're never going to have to smell cigarettes or pot. When they smell it, your phone will light up and you'll have to solve that problem. You'll start getting a lot of complaints. So if you have single family home units, the next time you're at the property, if you smell cigarettes or pot, you can ask the people to move out because that's what's known as a non-curable lease violation. If they're violating the non-smoking part of the lease, that is not curable. Now, that's a technical legal term. You can look that up if you want, but that's why I say evict. If someone violates that part of the lease, you can evict them because they can't cure it. Some lease violations are curable. Others are not. Smoking is not one of. It's not curable. You have to ask them to move out. Okay, so let's move on to ease of selling. So with this, and I'm sorry about being. I didn't mean to be controversial about the smoking thing. I absolutely did not. This was in the context of managing rental property only. I'm not passing judgment on anyone who smokes. That wasn't the point. It was basically we're in the context of discussing managing rental properties. Okay. So ease of selling. So which one of these property types, a single-family dwelling unit or an apartment building, is easier to sell? There is a large buyer pool for single-family standalone units, single-family homes or townhomes. There's a large buyer pool. There's tons of people who want to buy those. There is a much smaller buyer pool for apartment buildings. One reason is they cost a lot. The second reason is there's just fewer people in our population who want to buy an apartment building. There's lots of people who want to buy a home or a condo or a townhouse. Very few people who want to buy an apartment building. So apartment buildings take longer to sell, and there's a larger amount of money involved in getting them sold. So as we've gone through here, you can see this has sort of been a back and forth between, sometimes it's better to have a single standalone unit like a home, townhome. Sometimes it's better to have an apartment building. For example, when you have a tenant move out from the single-family home, you're 100% vacant if they move. Not so with an apartment building. So that favors the apartment building, but some of these things do not favor the apartment building situation. Okay, so the income potential for these two different types of properties, generally the income is going to be higher over time with an apartment building. And the reason goes back to if one person moves out of a single-family home, it's vacant. It's 100% vacant. Over time, the apartment building will have turnover, but because the majority of the tenants don't all move out at the same time, you have more cash flow in the apartment building situation. So all things being equal, if the neighborhood was the same, if the date of the single-family home and the apartment building were the same date, if they were built at the same time, you're going to make more money from the apartment building because your apartment building will never go 100% vacant. Whereas a single-family dwelling will go 100% vacant when the tenant leaves, when the tenant moves out. So I would say that, in my opinion, I've got experience with both property types. I like to collect rent. Bottom line, I have noticed as I've gone through life, I like providing nice places for people to live, and I like to collect rent. I like to own property. I like both kinds of properties. There's one important difference between these two property types that makes me favor the single family home or townhome over the apartment building, and that is this. If there is some sort of catastrophe and you have one apartment building affected, it wipes out the whole apartment building. Like if there's flooding, or if the neighborhood degrades, goes downhill, or if there's a fire or some catastrophe, if you have, say, 12 single-family homes spread out in different neighborhoods, and that happens to one of them, all the other ones are still fine. Whereas with the apartment building, if the whole thing goes up in smoke, you've got a big problem. So I tend to like owning both at the same time. One of the things I like about the single-family units is this. I like to drive into nice neighborhoods and find decrepit homes that are dated, that have not been maintained, fixer-uppers. There are a lot more fixer-upper homes in nice neighborhoods in any given geographic area than there are apartment buildings in nice neighborhoods that are fixer-uppers. So if you're and I've done pretty well buying single-family homes in really nice neighborhoods that were like the worst house on the nicest in the nicest neighborhood. I've had a lot of success doing that. So I still have a soft spot for that, even though in terms of financial efficiency, the apartment building is better because, again, the cash flow is better over time with the apartment building. And when it comes time to sell, though, another thing about the single-family units, if you're trying to do like a 1031 exchange, it can be a sort of a PITA, if you know what that stands for, pain in the. If you have a bunch of single-family dwelling units, each one is a different sale, a different negotiation, a different close. Whereas with an apartment building, there's one negotiation. There's one close, right? So if you're doing a 1031 exchange, you'd rather have the apartment building. So like I said, I've done both. I have not run into too many situations in my life where I've wanted to sell a large number of properties at the same time. That happened once, and the selling environment was favorable. So it was pretty easy to get things sold. We had apartment buildings at that time, all apartment buildings. And it was pretty easy to get things sold. But so you have to sort of weigh the differences. If you like the diversification of having different properties spread out in different locations, and you're not a billionaire, it's easier to buy a lot of single-family homes and then maybe one apartment building every once in a while, and then you've got some diversification. If the apartment building, something happens, it gets flooded or burns down, you still have all the single-family homes. So I would not shy away from either one of these. The lending is better for the single-family dwelling units. It's easier to find a lender. It's not as easy to find DSCR or bank statement lenders for apartment buildings. So I've owned and operated both, and I like both of them. So I don't have a preference either way. The one thing I do like about the single-family units is the turnover is lower. I don't have to spend as much effort re-renting units because people stay longer. So that's one of the things I like that is different. If you have any questions about any of this, please post in the comments. And I've got a lot of experience in this area. I'd be happy to answer your questions. And I want to thank everybody for watching, and have a great day.